The Road to Darkness by Chuck Montana. Mick Tanner gripped the wheel of his rig, the leather worn smooth by years of long, solitary hauls. The rhythmic thrum of the engine was a familiar lullaby that usually kept his mind from wandering. But tonight, memories clawed their way to the surface. He could almost hear the sickening thud of metal against flesh from that fateful night, even though the incident was years behind him. As Route 66 stretched endlessly ahead, the CB radio crackled to life with a burst of static. The signal was weak, the voices distorted and garbled as if from another world. Mick frowned, adjusting the volume, but the words remained indecipherable. "Is anyone out there?" he called into the mic, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. The radio hissed back at him, then fell silent, leaving Mick with only the hum of his engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt. Mile marker 77 loomed ahead, a grim specter in the night. The stories about this stretch of road were legendary among truckers, ghostly figures hitching rides, orbs of light dancing across the pavement. Mick had always dismissed them as tales spun to pass endless hours on the road, but tonight, the air felt different. Suddenly his headlights flickered, their beams wavering as if struggling against an unseen force. Mick's heart skipped a beat. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling the rig over to the side of the road near a deserted rest stop. The place looked abandoned, its once bright signs faded and peeling, wooden picnic tables shrouded in shadows. Mick killed the engine and stepped out, the night air cool against his skin. A full moon cast pale light across the lot, illuminating the cracked asphalt and overgrown weeds. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Just a quick break," Mick told himself, his voice sounding hollow in the stillness. He walked towards a picnic table, the crunch of gravel underfoot echoing in the quiet. As he sat down, the wind picked up, rustling leaves and whispering through the trees like distant voices. The radio in the cab crackled again, louder this time. Mick stood, peering back towards his truck, the hairs on his neck prickling. He returned to the cab, picking up the receiver with a hand that trembled slightly. "Who's there?" he asked, the question hanging in the air. A voice emerged from the static, faint yet clear. "You can't hide from what you've done, Mick." Mick's heart thudded in his chest, the voice unmistakably familiar. It was the voice of the man he'd hit all those years ago. "No, it can't be," Mick whispered, shaking his head violently. Panic surged through him, and he dropped the receiver, the radio falling silent once more. He stumbled out of the cab, looking wildly around the deserted rest stop. Shadows seemed to stretch and shift, forming shapes that danced mockingly at the edge of his vision. Mick backed away from the truck, his breathing ragged. "It's just your mind playing tricks," he told himself, but the doubt lingered, clawing at his sanity. A figure stepped out from the shadows, translucent and shimmering in the moonlight. Mick froze, recognizing the spectral form of a young man in a leather jacket, his face a mask of sorrow. "Why did you leave me?" the apparition asked, voice echoing with an otherworldly timbre. Mick's throat tightened, guilt crashing over him like a wave. I was scared," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. The ghost nodded slowly, eyes full of an ancient sadness. The temperature plummeted, frost spreading across the ground as the ghost reached out a hand. "Make it right," the spirit implored, his voice fading into the wind. Mick found himself nodding, tears blurring his vision. As suddenly as it appeared, the ghost vanished, the rest stop returning to its silent vigil. Mick stood alone, the encounter. The stars hung like forgotten lanterns over the desolate stretch of Route 66, the road as quiet as a grave. Mick Tanner pulled his rig into the rest area, the engine's growl fading into the night. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Mick stepped out, stretching his stiff limbs. The cold bit at his skin, and he shivered. He squinted into the darkness, eyes adjusting to the dim yellow light of the lampposts. A movement caught his eye, a figure, staggering just beyond the reach of the light. Mick's heart quickened as he stepped closer. "Hey, you okay?" he called out, voice echoing in the emptiness. The figure moved closer, revealing itself to be a woman. Her clothes were torn and stained with something dark. Her wild eyes met his, but no words came. "What happened to you?" Mick asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman clutched a child's bracelet, her fingers pale and trembling, her lips parted, but only a faint whimper escaped. Mick fumbled for his cell phone, the screen glowing in the night. No signal. He cursed under his breath, glancing back at the woman. "Let's get you some help," he suggested, trying to sound reassuring. She shook her head violently, eyes wide with terror. Her gaze darted around, as if searching for unseen threats. All right, Mick murmured, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "We'll figure something out." He took off his jacket, draping it over her shoulders. The night's chill seeped into his bones, but he ignored it. The woman clutched the jacket tightly, her eyes never leaving his. Mick realized she wasn't just lost, she was running from something. "Is someone after you?" he asked, voice low. She nodded, a single tear tracing down her grimy cheek. Mick felt a surge of protectiveness. He couldn't leave her here. He looked around, the shadows seeming to close in. The rest area, usually a place of respite, felt like a trap. "Come on," Mick urged, gesturing towards his truck. "It's safer there." As they moved, her bare feet shuffled against the gravel, leaving faint red marks in their wake. Mick winced at the sight, but pressed on. Inside the cab, the woman sat huddled in the passenger seat, eyes darting nervously. Mick rummaged through the glove compartment, searching for anything useful. "We'll wait here for a bit," he said, trying to sound confident. "Maybe the signal will come back." The woman nodded, her silence more haunting than any scream. Mick felt the weight of her fear, heavy and suffocating. He glanced at the bracelet in her hands, its tiny charms glittering in the truck's interior light. "Is that yours?" he asked softly. She shook her head, a sob escaping her lips. Mick's stomach twisted. The bracelet belonged to a child. Suddenly, the truck's radio crackled to life, a burst of static filling the cab. Mick jumped, reaching to turn it off, but a voice came through, faint, distorted. "Help, please," the voice murmured, barely audible. Mick's eyes widened, his hand frozen on the dial. "Did you hear that?" he asked, looking at the woman. Her eyes were wide, tears streaming silently. She nodded, her body trembling violently. "It's okay," Mick said, more to himself than to her. "We'll get through this." He tried the ignition, hoping to move the truck, but the engine sputtered and died. "Damn it," Mick cursed, pounding the steering wheel. The radio crackled again, the same voice repeating, "Help, please." Mick stared at the dashboard, his mind racing. "Who is this?" he shouted into the void. The woman flinched at his outburst, curling into herself. Mick took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm within. Outside, a faint rustling reached his ears, like footsteps in the gravel. His heart thudded painfully. Shadows of the past, the headlights of Deputy Riley Shaw's patrol car cut through the thick, oppressive darkness of Route 66. The road stretched on endlessly, a black ribbon under a sky devoid of stars. As he approached mile marker 77, the hairs on the back of his neck prickled with unease. Mick Tanner stood by the side of the road, his truck looming like a sleeping beast behind him. The night air was cold, biting through his flannel shirt as he waved down the approaching patrol car. "Deputy, over here!" he shouted, his voice carrying a hint of desperation. Riley stepped out of the vehicle, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Mick, what happened?" he asked, eyeing the truck driver with a mix of curiosity and concern. "I swear, Riley, there was a woman here. She was in a panic, said she needed help, but when I turned around, she was gone," Mick explained, his eyes wide and still searching the shadows. The deputy glanced around, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the darkness. "Did you get a look at her? Anything that might help identify her?" "She was wearing a white dress, and there was something about her wrist." "A bracelet, I think," Mick replied, rubbing his hands together to ward off the chill. Riley nodded, his mind racing with stories of the past. "You know, there have been tales about this stretch of road. Disappearances, strange sightings, all linked to this very spot," he mused, the weight of the past heavy in his voice. The wind rustled the nearby trees, whispering secrets of the night. "You don't suppose she could be one of the missing, do you? One of those cases?" Mick asked, his voice trembling slightly. "It's possible," Riley admitted, pulling out a notepad. "But we need more to go on than just a bracelet and a vanished woman." They walked towards the truck, the gravel crunching underfoot. The night seemed to deepen around them. shadows gathering in the corners of their vision. Suddenly, a soft jingle caught their attention. Riley turned, his flashlight beam catching a glint of metal on the ground. "Look at this," he said, crouching to pick up a delicate silver bracelet. It was adorned with tiny charms, each one reflecting the light in a different way. "That's it! That's the bracelet she was wearing," Mick confirmed, his voice a mixture of relief and confusion. Before they could ponder further, a sudden chill swept over them, as if the air itself was alive with unseen eyes. The sound of footsteps echoed in the darkness, but when they turned, there was nothing there. "Let's keep looking." "She couldn't have gone far," Riley said, though his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. Hours seemed to pass as they scoured the area, their flashlights probing into every shadow. But the woman, whoever she was, had vanished into the night, leaving only the bracelet as a silent testament to her presence. Finally, exhausted and with little to show for their efforts, they returned to the patrol car. "We'll check this against missing persons reports," Riley said, pocketing the bracelet. "Maybe it'll lead us somewhere." "You think we'll find her?" Mick asked, looking up at the sky where the first hints of dawn were beginning to color the horizon. "I hope so, Mick." "I really do," Riley replied, though the shadows in his eyes suggested he knew the road held its own secrets, ones that might never be uncovered. As they drove away from mile marker 77, the road stretched out before them, a path shrouded in the mysteries of the past. The bracelet lay between them, a whisper of the unknown, a promise of the shadows yet to be revealed. Voices in the night. The night was heavy with silence as Riley and Mick drove along the empty stretch of Route 66. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from the CB radio. As they approached the infamous mile marker 77, a chill seemed to seep into the truck's cabin. Mick glanced at Riley, his eyes shadowed and serious. "This is where it all starts," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The road stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the darkness. Riley shifted in her seat, her gaze fixed on the road signs that loomed out of the night. "We have to find something, Mick. Those people, they can't just vanish." Her voice trembled slightly, the enormity of their task weighing on her. Every mile that passed seemed to echo with whispers of the missing. The CB radio crackled to life unexpectedly, static hissing before a voice emerged, distorted and eerie. "Detour ahead, follow the signs." Mick and Riley exchanged a glance, the hairs on the back of Mick's neck standing on end. "That's not a regular broadcast," he said quietly, turning the dial to try and locate the source. The radio fell silent again, leaving them in an oppressive quiet. Their investigation had led them here, to the stretch of road where so many had disappeared without a trace. Mick recalled the stories truckers who'd spoken of strange detours and voices that led them astray. It always began with a voice on the radio, luring them into the night. "We need to find where these signs are," Riley said, consulting a map spread out on her lap. Her finger traced a route, noting the places marked by tragedy. Mick slowed the truck as they neared a cluster of trees, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The moon cast an otherworldly glow over the landscape. Riley peered into the shadows, her breath catching as she spotted something in the undergrowth. "Mick, look there!" she exclaimed, pointing. A weathered wooden sign stood partially obscured by vines, the paint faded but still legible. "Detour." They exited the truck cautiously, the night air cold against their skin. Mick approached the sign, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "This doesn't look official," he observed, touching the rough wood. Nearby, another sign pointed into the dense forest, its arrow leading away from the road. Riley shivered involuntarily, the air thick with an unspoken threat. Why would anyone follow these? She wondered aloud. The CB radio crackled to life again, the same distorted voice echoing through the stillness. "Follow the path. Come closer." Mick's heart thudded in his chest, the voice both inviting and sinister. It was as if the night itself was urging them into the darkness. Mick nodded to Riley, determination hardening his features. "We have to know," he said, leading the way down the narrow path. The forest closed in around them, shadows dancing in the flashlight's beam. Every step seemed to amplify the silence. broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Riley stayed close, her eyes scanning for any hint of danger. "Do you think the killer uses these radios to draw people in?" she asked, her voice a hushed whisper. The theory made too much sense, each piece falling into place like a grim puzzle. Mick paused, listening intently as the wind rustled through the trees. "It's possible," he replied, the weight of the truth settling over him. The realization that they might be walking into a trap was unavoidable. They continued deeper into the forest, guided by the sporadic signs that seemed to appear just when they were about to lose hope. The path twisted and turned, leading them further from the safety of the road. "We should mark our way," Riley suggested, breaking a branch to leave a trail. Echoes from mile marker 77. The air inside the local archives felt thick and stagnant, as if the past lingered within its dusty shelves. Riley pushed open the heavy wooden door, a creak echoing through the dimly lit room. "This way," Riley whispered, leading Mick down a narrow aisle lined with old newspapers and yellowing documents. The scent of aged paper was overwhelming, mingling with the faint smell of mildew. They reached a small table in the corner, where a stack of files awaited them, each one marked with a faded red stamp that read "Confidential." "Here it is," Riley said, flipping open the top file. "Everything about mile marker 77. Mick leaned in closer, the dim light casting shadows across his furrowed brow. "In the 1970s, Riley began, her voice barely above a whisper, there were a series of murders and disappearances all linked to this stretch of road. Mick nodded, his eyes scanning the documents. "And they say," Riley continued, "it's all connected to a figure known only through trucker lore." Mick shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him. "A ghost story?" he asked, trying to mask his unease. "Not quite," Riley replied, her fingers tracing the edge of a photograph. "More like a legend, but one with deadly consequences." Thunder rumbled outside, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the building. "Do you think this figure is still out there?" Mick asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. "If the files are right," Riley answered, "then yes, and they might still be choosing their targets." Mick's gaze fell upon a grainy black and white photograph pinned to one of the pages. "This is the rest stop, isn't it?" He recognized the location immediately. The image depicted a desolate area, long abandoned, yet unmistakably the place where he had taken a break not long ago. Everyone who disappeared had something in common, Riley said, her finger tapping a list of names. "What do you mean?" Mick asked, leaning closer to read the notes scribbled in the margins. "They all traveled alone, and they all stopped at the rest area," Riley explained, her voice steady but grave. Mick's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing louder in the silence of the archives. "We need to warn others," he insisted, gripping the edge of the table. "We will," Riley assured him. "But first, we need to know more about the killer's criteria." As they delved deeper into the files, the hours slipped by unnoticed, swallowed by the shadows that crept across the room. "There's a pattern," Riley murmured, her eyes scanning pages of testimonies and police reports. "What if," Mick started, hesitating, "what if this isn't just one person?" Riley paused, her eyes meeting his. "You think it could be a group?" she asked, her tone contemplative. Mick nodded slowly. "Or maybe the lore grew, and now it's something bigger, something organized." The idea settled heavily between them, like a fog rolling in from the unknown. "Then we have to find out who or what is perpetuating this," Riley said, her resolve hardening. "And we have to do it fast." The rain began to pelt against the windows, a relentless drumming that matched the urgency of their task. "Mile marker 77, Mick mused, glancing at the ominous header on the file. "Why do they choose that spot?" Riley shrugged, her expression a mix of curiosity and dread. "Maybe there's something about the location itself," she suggested, flipping through more pages. "Or maybe it's part of the ritual," Mick added, pondering the possibilities. The room seemed to darken as they pieced together fragments of the past, each revelation like a chilling whisper in the night. "We need to go back there," Riley declared, her voice firm. "We might find clues we missed before." Mick swallowed hard, the memory of his last visit to the rest stop still. The game of deception, The asphalt stretched into the night like a black ribbon disappearing into oblivion. Mick Tanner gripped the wheel, his knuckles white under the dim glow of the dashboard lights. The CB radio crackled to life, static giving way to a voice that was both familiar and haunting. "You're running out of time, Mick," the voice taunted, a hint of malicious glee lacing every word. Mick exchanged a quick glance with Riley, who sat in the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the darkness outside. "He's watching us, isn't he?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Feels like it," Mick replied, his gaze fixed on the road ahead, where shadows seemed to dance just beyond the reach of the headlights. Just then, a sign appeared on the roadside, its letters barely visible in the dim light. "Detour," it read, with an arrow pointing toward a dirt path that led into the woods. Mick hesitated, the steering wheel cold beneath his hands. "We have to take it," Riley urged, her voice a mix of urgency and fear. "It's the only way." With a reluctant nod, Mick turned the truck off the main road, the tires crunching over gravel as they entered the dense forest. The trees loomed high above, casting eerie shadows that seemed to reach out for them. The CB radio crackled again, the voice now dripping with satisfaction. "Welcome to my game," it said, each word deliberate and chilling. Riley's fingers closed around a small bracelet she had found earlier, its beads cold against her skin. "This belonged to one of the kids," she murmured, a realization dawning on her. Mick shot her a questioning look, his brow furrowed in concern. "What do you mean?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "It's a clue," she replied, holding it up for him to see. "I think it's part of why he's doing this." The path narrowed, branches scraping against the sides of the truck like skeletal fingers. Mick tightened his grip, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need to figure this out before it's too late," he said, urgency creeping into his voice. Suddenly, the path opened into a clearing, the moon casting an eerie glow over the scene. In the center stood an old, abandoned cabin, its windows dark and foreboding. "That's where he wants us," Riley said, her voice barely more than a breath. Mick nodded, determination stealing his features. "Then that's where we'll go." He parked the truck and reached for the door handle, his resolve unwavering. As they stepped out, the night air was cold and still, the silence oppressive. Riley moved closer to Mick, the bracelet clenched tightly in her hand. "We stick together," she reminded him, her voice steady despite the fear. The cabin loomed before them, its wooden exterior weathered and worn. Mick took a deep breath and pushed open the door, the hinges squealing in protest. Inside, the darkness was thick, almost palpable. "Stay close," Mick whispered as they ventured forward, their footsteps echoing softly in the empty space. They moved through the cabin, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight. Each room was empty, save for the lingering sense of dread that clung to the air. In the far corner of the last room, they found a series of photographs pinned to the wall, each one showing a different victim. Riley's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the faces. "This is his trophy room," Mick muttered, anger simmering beneath his words. Riley's eyes fell on a picture of a young girl, the bracelet in her hand identical to the one in the photograph. "This is it," she said, her voice a mix of horror and understanding. "This is why he's doing it." Suddenly, the CB radio in Mick's hand crackled to life once more. "Did you find what you were looking for?" the voice taunted, its tone mocking. Mick's jaw clenched, his resolve hardening. "We're done with your gam." Into the abyss, the night draped itself over the highway like a heavy cloak, swallowing the taillights of Mick's truck as it cruised down the asphalt. Beside him, Riley fidgeted with the CB radio, her fingers nimble and quick. "Are you sure this is going to work?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mick kept his eyes on the road, his jaw set with determination. "It's our best shot," he replied, his voice a gravely whisper. He flicked on the truck's high beams, illuminating the endless ribbon of road ahead. The CB crackled to life, a static-filled message echoing through the cab. "Anyone out there on Route 66, come in. We've got a situation at mile marker 77. The message was a lure, bait for the killer who prowled these roads. Riley glanced at Mick, her eyes reflecting the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "What if he doesn't take the bait?" she asked, worry etching lines across her forehead. "He will." Mick assured her, his hands gripping the wheel tighter. He's been hunting us for too long. He won't be able to resist. As they approached the infamous mile marker 77, the air grew colder, the oppressive silence of the night pressing down on them. The marker loomed ahead, barely visible in the darkness, a sinister sentinel on the edge of the abyss. Suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, distant but unmistakable. "He's here," Mick muttered, his heart pounding. Riley swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she clutched the edge of her seat. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We stick to the plan," Mick replied, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Just hold on." The truck barreled down the highway, the engine's roar swallowed by the vast emptiness surrounding them. Behind them, the headlights grew closer, the killer's vehicle gaining ground. Mick's pulse quickened, adrenaline surging through his veins. "We're almost there," he said, glancing at Riley. "Get ready." Riley nodded, her face pale but determined. "I never thought it would come to this," she murmured, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The road curved sharply, and Mick swung the truck into the turn, tires screeching in protest. The killer's car followed, its headlights slicing through the night like knives. At the last moment, Mick veered off onto an abandoned service road, the truck bounding over the uneven ground. "Hang on!" he shouted, the cab jostling violently. The killer's vehicle skidded to a halt, gravel spraying as it came to a stop. The chase had ended, but the true confrontation was just beginning. Mick and Riley tumbled out of the truck, breathless and tense. "Show yourself!" Mick yelled into the darkness, his voice echoing. A shadowy figure emerged from the killer's car, stepping into the moonlight. "You think you can escape me?" the killer taunted, his voice dripping with malice. Riley gasped, recognizing the figure. "No, it can't be," she whispered, horror dawning in her eyes. Mick's heart sank as he realized the truth. The killer was someone they had trusted, someone who had been with them all along. The confrontation escalated, the three of them locked in a deadly dance under the moonlit sky. "This ends tonight," Mick shouted, his voice fierce and unwavering. The killer laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the night. "You're out of your depth, Tanner," he sneered, stepping closer. Riley backed away, fear and anger warring within her. "Why? Why would you do this?" she cried, tears brimming. "Because I can," the killer replied simply, his eyes cold and devoid of mercy. Mick lunged forward, fists clenched, determined to end the nightmare once and for all. The struggle was fierce, the ground shifting beneath them as they fought. Riley watched, her heart racing, knowing that the outcome would decide their fate. The long haul home. The moon hung low over the desolate stretch of highway, casting an eerie glow on the cracked asphalt. Mick Tanner and Riley stood by the side of the road, the faint hum of distant engines, a reminder of the world beyond mile marker 77. "I never thought I'd see the end of this," Mick murmured, his voice tinged with exhaustion. He leaned against the hood of his truck, eyes fixed on the horizon. Riley nodded, her gaze drifting to the empty rest stop. "It's over. Mick, we did what we had to do." Her words were firm, but a shadow of doubt lingered in her eyes. The air was thick with the scent of rain and the lingering echoes of the night's terror. The highway, once haunted by whispers and shadows, now seemed to exhale in relief. "I keep thinking about them," Mick said, his voice barely above a whisper, "those who never made it home." His eyes were clouded with memories of faces long forgotten by the world. Riley placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We gave them peace, Mick. That counts for something." Her touch was gentle, a tether to the present. The memories of that fateful night, the screams and the blood, were etched into their minds. But now, the road felt different, as if it had shed a layer of its dark past. "I should have come back sooner," Mick confessed, his voice laden with guilt. "Maybe things would have been different." "You can't change the past," Riley replied softly, "but you can move forward. That's what matters." The highway stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of possibilities and unknowns. The killer had been apprehended, the shadows dispelled, and the ghosts of mile marker 77 finally laid to rest. "What will you do now?" Riley asked, her curiosity piqued by Mick's newfound resolve. Mick shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I think it's time to hit the road again." Maybe head out to the coast, see the ocean. He glanced at Riley, his eyes bright with a flicker of hope. Riley smiled back, a warmth in her expression that had been absent for so long. Sounds like a plan. She turned to face the highway, the wind teasing her hair. What about you? Mick inquired, his curiosity genuine. I think I'll stick around, Riley replied, her voice steady. There's still a lot of work to be done here, Mick nodded, respecting her decision. You're braver than most I've known. His admiration for her strength was clear. The first drops of rain began to fall, a gentle patter against the windshield of Mick's truck. It was as if the sky itself was cleansing the remnants of the past. Take care, Riley, Mick said, extending his hand. We made a good team. Riley shook his hand firmly, a bond forged in the fires of their shared ordeal. You too, Mick. Drive safe. With a final nod, Mick climbed into the cab of his truck, the door closing with a reassuring thud. The engine roared to life, a familiar sound that promised new beginnings. As he pulled away from the rest stop, Mick glanced in the rearview mirror. Riley stood by the side of the road, a solitary figure against the vastness of the open highway. The rain intensified, a curtain of water that blurred the landscape into a tapestry of grays and blues. Mick drove on, the rhythmic thrum of the tires a soothing counterpoint to the storm outside. We'll be okay, he whispered to himself, the words a mantra for the journey ahead. The road stretched on, a long haul home in every sense of the word, and as the miles rolled by, the ghosts of mile marker 77 faded into the distance, leaving only the promise of brighter days to come. The end. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends about my listening library.